Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Pompeii. Pompeii is such a sad tale. As many of you are likely to know from history class, Pompeii was an ancient city near modern-day Naples in the Campania region of Italy. The issue with Pompeii that it was built at the base of Mount Vesuvius, a volcano that spilled her fury in 79 AD. The city had been in existence for thousands of years before the eruption, and by the time of its demise, it was a thriving Roman hub. The eruption covered Pompeii in 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash, burying the city but largely preserving a snapshot of Roman life. The lost city of Pompeii was rediscovered over a millennium and a half later and was excavated in the late 1800s. These days, more and more of the city is being uncovered under the ash and pumice. The area draws in 2.5 million tourists now each year who delight in the macabre history of the Roman town. Indeed, it is possible to see ash-covered corpses of bodies nearly 2,000 years old. Coming in at number 9, gone overnight, we have Chaohu. With a simple flick of an administrative wrist, the Chinese city of Chaohu disappeared overnight, which is pretty worrying. Can China just cancel cities these days? It seems so. Chaohu was a city of 4 million people and was known for housing a Han Dynasty tomb and a large freshwater lake. It seems that the Chinese government is pretty obsessed with economic statuses and statistics, and the reason that the city was effectively deleted was to adjust its borders, giving land to nearby cities to make them seem more profitable, which actually sounds kinda crazy, right? The worrying thing is that there was absolutely no public consultation or official notice, and residents were only aware when they were told that they were living in new parts of old cities. So I live in Toronto, like I said, and I guess it's like waking up in Toronto and it no longer being a thing, and I'm told like, oh, you live in East Niagara now. I guess not a lot would change, but at the same time, everything would change. Weird. So weird. Okay, pinnacle of weird at number 8, we have Taured. Where is Taured? Is it a place, or does it exist beyond our universe? We have talked a little bit about the man from Taured on Most Amazing a few times, but now I want to talk more about the country itself. But first, let me recap. In 1954, a man was detained at the Japanese border in Haneda. This is in Japan, and he arrived on a plane from Europe. The man was affronted at the border control officer's questions. He claimed that he was on his third business trip to Japan that year. When he was searched, he had a wallet filled with a mixture of currencies, seeming to verify his business traveler status. When he presented his passport, officials were absolutely baffled. They'd never seen a passport like this before. Asking where he was from, the man, who primarily spoke French, said he was from Taured. I'm sorry, where? Officers were absolutely baffled because, as you probably know, there is no such place. When he was asked to point to it on a map, he pointed somewhere in the locale of Andorra today. He then became confused and agitated that the map he was given didn't actually include Taured. So, was it real? Did it disappear, or did he appear from another dimension? His passport looked legitimate, but he was from the mysterious country. His passport even had stamps in it, legitimate stamps, that seemed to actually cooperate with his story. He was also carrying a checkbook to a non-existent bank branch from Taured. So I guess my question is, even if the passport and checkbook were convincing fakes, how on earth would he even have been able to get on the plane in the first place? Passports are checked at multiple times when you go to an airport, including at check-in and before you're allowed to even board. I for one have like a deep feeling that Taured is real, but where did it go? Once again I ask, is it in another dimension? Because I don't know, I think that. Speaking of other dimensions, this is crazy at number 7, we have the Cloud City. This terrifying city in the sky appeared and disappeared within the space of a day. Chinese media went wild when thousands of residents who live in 2 different cities in the country spotted what looked like a huge floating city in the sky. Have a look and tell me what you think, like what on earth could that even be? The phenomenon was described as being a ghost city by onlookers who saw skyscrapers in the clouds. To me, I'm thinking this is another sign of a parallel universe or something. The phenomenon occurred in both Guangdong and Jiangxi, with some believing it was an alien city. The images were caught on camera for the world to see, so I have to say, what on earth or above earth is going on? Even though it looks like a city in the clouds to you and me, apparently it's an optical illusion called Fata Morgana, which is a natural mirage. That being said, hundreds of people saw this disappearing cloud city, which to me makes me think that actually there might be more to it than simple simple mirage. A reappearing city up next, we have Villa Epicuén. Oh my goodness, wait until you see pictures from Villa Epicuén. Villa Epicuén was a tourist resort near Buenos Aires in Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, meaning the whole town had to be abandoned. Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuén became a sunken town, lost to the perilous tides. However, strangely, the waters began to recede again in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky-looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the banks, but honestly, it actually looks kinda cool in like a ghostly, scary way. Coming in at number 5, we have Angakuni Lake. This is a spooky Canadian urban legend set in the frozen north of Nunavut, one of Canada's largest and yet least populated territories. The conditions in the Arctic land are pretty terrifying at the best of times. The story goes that in the year 1930, a fur trapper, Joe LaBelle, needed to take shelter from a storm, so he decided to trek to a close-by Inuit village that he said he knew well. He'd been a few times in the past and called out a greeting ahead of his arrival, which was weirdly met with no response. When he arrived in the village, he found that its entire population had vanished. Stranger still, it appeared that inside the houses, food was still kept in stocks, and there were even some half-eaten meals on tables. It was as if everyone had fled at a moment's notice. LaBelle reported the incident to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Now, after months of investigation, they never found much of a trace of the residents. These days, the village can't be found at all, which has led many people to think that it simply never existed. Coming into number 4, we have Ashley. The story goes that in August 1952, the small town of Ashley in Kansas, USA, disappeared following a magnitude 7.9 on the Richter scale earthquake. The earthquake was said to have taken place at 3:28 AM, meaning the town's 679 residents were all in bed. The epicenter of the earthquake was none other than Ashley Town Center. Now, the urban legend says that when state law enforcement arrived at what should have been the outskirts of the farming community, they found a smoldering, burning crack in the earth measuring 100 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. Back in the day when we did things in yards. The depth of the hole was never determined. Many people think that the story of the disappeared town is none other than a creepypasta. Others say that there was indeed an earthquake on record in Kansas and that the town was lost, being too small to be on any maps in the first place. Honestly, I'm not sure. Coming into number 3, we have the story of Rio Verde. This is a Brazilian ghost story. Or are the legends of the disappearance of Rio Verde real? The story goes that in 1923, a group of explorers came by the village of Rio Verde in the Brazilian jungle, supposedly a town of just 600 people. It seems that the explorers were shocked to find the town utterly deserted. They looked in houses and found things in a state of sudden disarray, chairs knocked over, food still on tables, clothes still in cupboards, cars still in driveways. According to the story, police were called to the town and they found a cryptic clue. It seems that one of the townsfolk had left behind a gun that, on examination, seemed to have recently been fired. Aside the gun, there was a mysterious message that read, "There is no salvation." Some people think that the town was abandoned in order to avoid conflict with guerrilla militias, which were a problem at the time. Others think that the disappearance had something to do with religion. To this day, nobody knows. Coming into number 2, we have the crazy story of the town on fire. Did you know that there is a legitimate abandoned town in Pennsylvania that is not only empty, but has been on fire for decades? Centralia was a thriving mining town in Columbia County with a population of a few thousand. These days, just 7 remain, clinging on to their doomed homes. It seems that all was well in Centralia for a very long time. It had been an active mine since the mid-1800s. Unfortunately, since 1962, it has been burning from the inside. It is suspected that the fire started from deliberate trash burning and could well keep burning for a further 250 years, which is absolutely insane. The residents first noticed the fire when smoke began billowing from the ground, accompanied by a foul smell of burning trash. Not only that, carbon monoxide was detected seeping from the ground. With temperatures hotter than the planet Mercury, it was decided that it was too dangerous to even try putting out the flames, and as a result, the town was evacuated slowly, but many people remained living there until 1981. That was when a 12-year-old boy fell into a sinkhole that suddenly opened up in his backyard. He survived by clinging onto a tree root, but from the hole came a plume of hot steam found to contain poisonous gas. That was it for the rest of the town. These days the town is deserted save from 7 people who just won't leave, but once again, that fire still burns. Okay, are you ready for the saddest story that you'll hear today? Coming into number 1, we have Ordor-sur-Glane. This town was eradicated in one day at the merciless hands of the Nazis. During the German invasion of France in the Second World War, the village of Ordor-sur-Glane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10, 1944, SS soldiers destroyed the village, killing 642 of its inhabitants. There was one sole survivor of the attack and 20 escapees. Now the SS invaded and rounded up men and shot them at point blank range in the barn, which actually may have been a better fate than that awarded to the women and children. They were rounded up into a church that was then set on fire by the German soldiers. You can imagine how that ended. Former French President Charles de Gaulle ordered that the town remain untouched as a memorial to those who lost their lives there. Cars lay in ruins, buildings are crumbling, and shops contain what was left of their stocks after the village was ransacked. Tourists can now visit the town remains and nearby memorial centre. I'd actually love to go and pay my respects. It sounds creepy, but honestly historically really cool. I'd better watch out though, because the ransacked town is said to be haunted, and of course it is. Coming in at number 10, we have the unreachable town of Urkhammer. Is this a true story? If so, well, I'm scared. It seems like there did indeed used to be a town by the name of Urkhammer in Iowa in the early 1900s. It was a farming town with a relatively small population. However, it was noted in the mid-1900s that it had been entirely abandoned and nobody knows why. That isn't even the scary bit either. There is a worrying story associated with the town. Whether or not it's true or false, I simply don't know, but well, have a listen. A tourist passed through the town in the early 1950s and bought some gas at a gas station. As he drove out of town, he realised his gas dial was still on empty. Sure enough, he'd been ripped off. He turned around to confront the station workers, but he never seemed to reach the town. He was sure that he'd only been driving for 5 minutes, but after turning around for 10 minutes, he actually never made it back. Soon he ran out of gas and decided to continue back into town on foot. It was his only option really, didn't have any gas. He kept walking and saw the town in the distance, but he could never reach it. Eventually he was picked up by a passing car who said that they had not driven through a town for hours. Weird. Coming in at number 9, we have Luto Katuto. Sounds fake. In March 2018, a major landslide led to the destruction of over 100 houses, wiping away the small town of Luto Katuto overnight. Have a look at the damage. The landslide has led to Luto Katuto being dubbed the town that the earth swallowed, and it's easy to see why. Now the cracks began appearing around 10 years before the major landslide in March 2018, but the government simply told the town residents to fill it with dirt. Town resident Giorgio Abeja spoke to the press and said that a loud noise woke him up in the night. The town was sinking. Luckily he was able to escape with his life. The town should never have been built on the clay ground, as it was always vulnerable to landslides. Sadly, 106 families were displaced as a result of the sinking. Another town swallowed whole at number 8, we have Bayou Corny. The controversial case of Bayou Corny sinkhole has been settled, with the Texas Brine Company at fault. In 2012, the town of Bayou Corny was evacuated when bubbles began rising in nearby water and there was increased seismic activity in the earth. Tim Murphy, a journalist for The Atlantic, said that Bayou Corny is the biggest ongoing industrial disaster in the United States that you haven't heard of, for some reason, nobody really talks about it. 350 residents have been turfed out of their home because their town is sinking before their very eyes. The disappearance of this town led to it being dubbed as Demon Alley. Coming into number 7, we have the New City Complex. The New City Complex was built in West Milford, New Jersey. The town was located along Route 32 and was built by the City of Newark Water and Reservoir Plant in order to provide housing for plant workers. Located along Route 23, the town is now entirely abandoned and nobody knows why, although of course there are theories. It is said that the town pretty much dissolved overnight in 1992. Rumour has it that the seeming exodus happened after a dodgy person moved to the town in the late 1980s. Others say that the town was never a town at all, just a set of a movie which has been left to crumble. So, is it an inexplicably abandoned town or an urban legend? Coming into number 6, we have the Roanoke. What happened to the people of Roanoke? It is a question still baffling us 430 years later, as it seems that not one but 2 occasions the town actually totally disappeared. Twice! Let me start from the beginning. In 1585, a small group of settlers made Roanoke Island off the coast of North Carolina their home, although many left when they found the conditions to be unsatisfactory. In 1587, 115 English settlers came to join those who had left, but weirdly they found no one. Like, absolutely no one. Weirdly though, they didn't seem to be too disturbed by that, assuming they must have just upped and left because they didn't like it. At the time, the colony decided to send their governor, a John White, back to England to gather fresh supplies and fresh settlers to expand the colony. He went back and then 3 years later he returned with his supplies to the colony. He'd left his wife and daughter there. He was expecting a big reunion. But once again, he found no traces of the inhabitants, just like the time the settlers had arrived, only this time he knew something was wrong because his family wouldn't have upped and left without telling him. The only clue he found was the word Croatoan carved into a wooden post, which is extremely strange. So where did the settlers of the Roanoke go? They were absolutely never seen again. Now some theorists say that they were killed by a Native American tribe, although the fact that there was no trace of their bodies is absolutely suspicious. Others say that they decided to sail back to England for some reason or another but got lost at sea, but again, I'm saying this town disappeared twice, so there really has to be something else going on. Coming into number 5, we have Christmas, Arizona. I love a good abandoned town, I really do. I went to Calico in California back in December 2017 and it was so interesting and spooky, but now I really want to visit this town even more. Meet the lost town of Santa Claus in Arizona. Santa Claus! The town was so popular with Christmas lovers despite its untraditional setting in the desert. The town was founded in 1937 and created as a Christmas resort, just, you know, cause. A Swiss chalet, and no I don't mean the chicken place, a Swiss themed house is what I mean, and plenty of Christmas trees, a life-size dollhouse, a Christmas themed inn. Basically kids could sit on Santa's lap all year round and they loved it. Until they didn't. Just stopped being a town. It's now abandoned by the side of the road. Instead of Christmas pies and elves, all you'll find these days are rattlesnakes, and while I love the sound of this, at the same time I feel like it would have sucked for the employees. I once worked as an elf in a toy store and I felt like I had too much Christmas, so the actual day was a bit of a letdown, so imagine that being all year. To be honest, I'm actually thinking maybe Santa Claus in Arizona is better off disappeared. Coming into number 4, we have Petra. Petra is located in southern Jordan in the Middle East and was settled in the early 9000 BCE. By the 4th century BCE, it was the capital of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra was carved into the rock, but after the Roman Empire took over the city, it started to disappear. At first, the population diminished in around the 7th and 8th centuries. Then the city became abandoned for centuries, with very little footfall due to its remote location. Petra lay forgotten and all but disappeared as a result of natural disasters and neglect. It was off the map for a very long time until Swiss explorers rediscovered the city in 1812. As stories dribbled back to Europe of a lost town, intrigue grew. Local folklore claimed that the city has been created by the wand of Moses, having actually lost touch with the actual history of the forgotten city. In 1929, archaeologists led an excavation of the city. In 2016, even more of the city was discovered buried in the sands. Coming Coming into number 3, we have the cities of the Amazon. When the dastardly colonists invaded swathes of the world, they brought back stories when they returned to their homelands. The Spanish returned home to regale stories of vast cities made of gold and filled with treasure along the Amazon. Some called it the City of Zed, others called it El Dorado. This led hungry explorers to seek out the cities, only when they got there, they never found them. Ever. All they found was thick jungle. The golden cities that early pioneers had spoken of became nothing but myth and legend. That was until recently. In 2010, aerial images taken by National Geographic revealed earthworks spanning 155 miles in the Amazon. As Amazonian rainforests have been cleared for agriculture, further evidence of ancient pre-Columbian movements have been found. So speaking of this somewhat mythical, we have Atlantis at number 2. So bearing in mind that a lot of people believe that the Amazonian cities were a myth, but now it's looking like they may well have been legit, what do we think the deal with Atlantis is? It's enduring, I'll say that. Atlantis is a legendary city that is mentioned in a number of pieces of ancient Greek literature, including by the late great philosopher Plato. It is said that Atlantis was a thriving city filled with affluence and positivity. That was until it sank. Atlantis was said to have sunk in the sea in a single day and night. There's been a lot of speculation as to where that city may be. People have searched the Straits of Gibraltar between Africa and Spain and found nothing as of yet. If Atlantis was real, it would be over 11,000 years old according to our calculations. I actually do kind of have a feeling that we may one day find this lost city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Langeville, Montana. This is actually utterly creepy. It really has freaked me out. I was doing some heavy research into disappeared places and towns and spaces, and Google autocomplete kept suggesting Langeville, Montana disappearance. Now, it would appear at the bottom in related searches too, as would Langeville, Montana incident or Langeville, Montana turned inside out, which is some Stranger Things stuff if I've ever heard of it. Oddly, when I clicked the link or even searched it up in the search bar, the internet yielded absolutely no information. Not a sausage. To me, this makes things even weirder, right? Why am I being suggested a mystery town when there's no evidence of it? I'm thinking that not only did this town disappear, but its data was also expunged from the internet. Why? I love a good cover-up theory, and let me make it even better with some investigative journalism. Here is the Google trend page for Langeville, Montana disappeared. As you can see, it was actually frequently searched for in July and August 2018, then a few times after. Here I've compared it to searches for me, my name. I'm not saying people Google me a lot, but I am a real person on a channel with a lot of subscribers, so it does happen. So there was a time when Langeville, Montana was being Googled loads, like super loads. Again, I'm just saying, why is there no record if people are Googling it? Questions, we need answers. Coming in at number 10, we have Audley's Town. Historians are baffled by the lost County Down Irish village of Audley's Town. The town was run by landowner, the then Lord of the Land Viscount Bangor, who lived in the town's manor, Castlewood. When he died, his wife remarried and evicted all of the townsfolk. She then sent them off on a boat called the Rose, and they were told to set sail to Boston. The Rose left in 1852, but the boat never arrived in the New World. Some say that Lady Bangor's new husband, Major Savage Nugent, hated the townfolk and had them killed. These days the town is covered over by woodland, and part of the disappeared town was used as a setting for Game of Thrones. Coming into number 9, we have the trenches. This is so sad. During World War I, Europe kinda lost it. I say kind of, like it literally did. Countries turned on one another and fought a bloody battle to the death. On one side was Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Canada, and eventually Japan and the United States. On the other was Germany, Austro-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. From October 1914 to March 1918, neither side made much ground and were stuck in a deadlock battle fought in trenches along the western front of France. It is thought that the total length of the trenches was around 2,490 kilometers. Not only did millions of people die in the trenches, they lived in them too. They were forced to live in squalid conditions. Millions and millions of men. For all intent and purpose, these long thin trenches were towns. Then, as As the war was over, the trenches were abandoned, leaving a history of bloodshed and violence in the ground. This is what they looked like over 100 years ago, and now this is what they look like today. This is the battlefield from Beaumont-Hamel in France, a notable fighting spot in the Battle of the Somme. Haunting. Coming into number 8 is Calico. Here is a picture of me at Calico Ghost Town in California. I stumbled across the place on Christmas Eve in 2017. It was a very interesting time of life for me then, and coming across a ghost town seemed to kind of fit with that weird and intense era. So Calico was an old silver mining town in the San Bernardino mountain range. The town was a flash in the pan of the Silver Rush era and was abandoned in 1907, with a brief return in 1915 when a cyanide plant was built to try and restore economic fortune. Sadly for Calico, it was to no avail. The town is undoubtedly mysterious and spooky, up in the mountains and in the middle of the desert, which is pretty remote. It is also said that the town is haunted by not one but 5 ghosts. There's a little girl ghost who only appears to children. There's also a ghost named Tumbleweed Harris, the lady in a white gown who wanders the outskirts of town, an angry cowboy, and the ghost of a dog named Dorsey. Coming into number 7, we have the Library of Alexandria. Alexandria is a coastal city in Egypt, sitting at the south of the Mediterranean Sea. The city dates back to 331 BC and was once the thriving capital of Egypt, but was reduced to nothing more than a small fishing village in the late Ottoman period. Brutal ransackings and an earthquake destroyed a lot of the original ancient landmarks, including the Alexandria Lighthouse and Cleopatra's tomb, which has notably never been found. Most notably, however, was the biggest loss suffered by the city, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Now, this was a massive library, so big that it was hailed as the most significant in the ancient world. It was said to contain the equivalent of 100,000 books, which in the early days of the written word was a lot. It's uncertain who destroyed the library, just that it's no longer there. Julius Caesar's been blamed, but so have many people who ransacked the city over its history. Moreover, while the city has been discussed a lot in literature, we don't know for sure if it ever really existed. Alexandria as a city was rebuilt eventually, and a city of the same name stands in its place, but the original landmark is by and large lost to the ground in the ocean, taking many of the secrets of the ancient world with it. Another ancient one up for you next. At number 6, we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, the Gardens of Babylon were one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They've been described as some of the most fantastical roof gardens of all time and were thought to have been located in Babylonia in Iraq. The gardens were believed to have been destroyed sometime after the 1st century AD, and many archaeologists have spent their lives looking for their remains. The existence is not confirmed by archaeological findings, and there have been suggestions that the gardens are mythical. That being said, they were thought to be in Iraq, and much of the country has been super ravaged by war over the years. Okay, I have to deviate from this video for a second to ask if anyone else remembers the Hanging Gardens of Babylon in Bill and Ted, because I absolutely swear that there was a Babylon bit, but I can't find it anywhere online, and rather like the gardens themselves, I'm thinking, are they mythical, or is this like a Mandela effect thing that I've just discovered? Let me know. Coming into number 5, we have Tyneham. Tyneham in England is a pretty spooky village indeed. The ghost village in South Dorset was abandoned in 1943 at the height of World War II. It was abandoned for fear of bombardment from the German forces. 225 villagers were rehomed, all of which thought that they would return after the war, but mysteriously the British government purchased the land and kept it for military training. The village is now opened at various times of the year for controlled tourism, but those who have been lucky enough to visit claim that it's very spooky indeed. In fact, some even claim that the village telephone rings even though it's disconnected from wires. The village was featured in a television show, Mysteries of the Abandoned, and this is what was said by visitors.
The village pond looks like any other village pond in England, except there's no wildlife there. There are no ducks. It's eerily empty.
Shut the front door! No ducks on the pond! Must be cursed, right? I have to say that the documentary is super dramatic and I kinda love it. They claim that it's eerie and that the church remains as it was in the 40s. Have a listen to this. I'm very, very here for the dramatic music.
Add a darker narrative. Like the cottages, which are little more than empty shells.
And these are in an unusual state of disrepair.
But where are the ducks? Questions. Coming in at number 4, we have the lost villages of the St. Lawrence. Controversially, in 1958, 9 villages were flooded along the St. Lawrence River in Canada. Now this was to make way for the St. Lawrence Seaway. The project was unpopular as 6,500 people were displaced, and of those people, the residents believed that the money that they got for their homes wasn't enough because the plans had already depressed property value. The villages were all in Ontario and are now under the water in the St. Lawrence River. Some of the areas are now popular scuba diving spots. Eerily though, it is possible to spot the outlines of the villages from the water when levels are low. Another sunken city at number 3, we have the withered city of Villa Epicuén. Villa Epicuén was a popular tourist resort near Buenos Aires, Argentina, but unfortunately it flooded in 1985, which meant that hopes and livelihoods had to be abandoned in the water. Can you imagine? Disappearing into the water, Villa Epicuén became a sunken town. However, weirdly, the waters began to recede in 2009, and now, after a drought, you can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time it was totally white, stripped of paint. The trees have died after their time underwater and away from the sun, and now they're white too, and the whole thing just looks ghostly and twisted and withered. Rusted cars and dislodged bathtubs litter the bank. Honestly, it looks so scary to me, but I also kinda love it. This town or city, more like, still exists but may not in our lifetime, so I want to give you a little warning at number 2. We have Venice. Venice is sinking. The historic town is made from 118 small islands connected by bridges and dates back to the 10th century BCE. The issue is here climate change and tourism. Cruise ships are turning up in the harbour, which disturbs the waters. Thousands of passengers disembark from the ships and trample the city, rarely without buying anything and contributing to the economy that could actually help save the city. The old buildings of Venice don't have stable foundations and they're gradually subsiding into the waters of the lagoon. Marry that with tourism and overcrowding and the rise in ocean levels in general, and it seems very much on the brink. It would be devastating to lose this city. Finally, coming into number 1, we have Happy Valley. Happy Valley is not a happy place to be. The town used to be known as Williamstown and is located between Syracuse and Camden in upstate New York. Founded in 1850, the town was a farming community, but it was abandoned in the Great Depression. That being said, the Depression probably wasn't the reason people left, if the rumours are to be believed anyway. It is said that the men of Williamstown angered a witch that lived on the fringes of the community. How they angered her? Well, some say they taunted her, others say they abused her. Either way, in a fit of rage, the town was suddenly struck with plague that killed a whole chunk of the population. On top of that, crops began failing. Today, those in surviving towns near Happy Valley claim that actually it is haunted and they will not venture into the abandoned spot.